was climbing into a tornado shelter after my crush, with absolutely no plan of what I'd do next. I was acting purely on impulse, and it felt amazing. I felt sure he knew I'd climbed in after him, but I couldn't see anything, so I used the flashlight on my phone and realized he'd already gone down the stairs. The rain was really pouring now, so I closed the lid. The last thing I wanted was to flood the shelter. Not on a special night like tonight. I'd never been this close to James before, just the two of us alone. Except we weren't alone. As soon as I closed the lid, I heard a girl's voice. No! I started panicking and decided this had been a stupid idea. I pushed the lid to climb back out, but it wouldn't open. No matter how hard I pushed it, it didn't budge. Oh my gosh, I was stuck. If it had just been me and James down there, it would have been quite exciting. But suddenly I heard a kissing sound and I realized my worst nightmare had just come true. I was stuck in a tornado shelter with my crush and his girlfriend by the sounds of things. I didn't want them to know I was there, like some creepy stalkers, so I tried to keep as quiet as possible. I could hear them laughing, and then the girl said, "Did anyone see you come in here? I hope we didn't get caught." And James replied, "No, I don't think so. Oh no, wait, there was a girl from my school, but she wouldn't say anything. She's such a loser." At that, I had to cover my face. I wanted to cry. It felt like he'd shoved a knife through my heart. And then I felt angry. I had to get out of there. This was literally the most embarrassing situation to ever be in. And what would my parents think when they found out? I gave the lid one final push, but I pushed too hard. The next moment, I lost my footing and was rolling down the stairs. I landed with a thump and blacked out for a second. When I opened my eyes, James and his girlfriend were standing over me. They didn't even ask me if I was okay. James just looked down at me and said, "Did you follow me here? What are you playing at?" Then he turned to his girlfriend and said, "Come on, babe, let's bounce." Then they just left me lying there and headed up the stairs. I was about to tell them that we were trapped down there, but they'd soon discover it for themselves. I could hear James bashing on the lid of the shelter, but obviously it wouldn't open. And then he shouted down to me and asked if I'd done this and if I thought it was funny. No, James, I did not find this funny. I wanted to shout up at him. Gosh, what would he say if he knew how much I wished I were his girlfriend and not that dumb blonde girl? Then he started shouting about how he had to get out ASAP because the next day was his big football game that was going to guarantee him a scholarship to a top college. He said he had to get it, otherwise he'd be stuck in this stupid town forever. Oh no. This was a disaster, and it was only just the beginning. I sat up and looked around with my flashlight on my phone and realized there was literally nothing down there except for some sandbags and an old scratchy blanket that looked like 1,000 bugs might be living in it. And then I realized I was shivering, like properly freezing cold. My phone was on 10%. Not that it mattered. There was absolutely no signal down there anyway. I didn't even have a bottle of water on me, and by the looks of things, James and his girlfriend had nothing either. Oh man. I held my breath as they came down the stairs. I was so scared of what they'd say to me. They were arguing, and James's girlfriend came right up to me and said, "This is all your fault. You've ruined everything." Truly, that felt like the most awkward moment of my entire life. James told her to try and calm down, and I learned her name was Amy. She must have gone to another school because I'd never seen her before. Neither of them had signal either, and soon they started screaming for help. I didn't want to tell them it was pointless. The rain was so loud, no one would hear us even if they were right above us. Eventually, I told them I was sorry, even though it wasn't my fault. I lied and told them I'd been trying to shelter from the rain because I'd forgotten my umbrella, but Amy didn't buy it. She said, "Yeah, right. You're clearly a stalker. Do you get kicks out of watching other people making out or something?" James said you're a loser, and he wasn't joking. Look at you. If I hadn't already been underground, I'd have asked the ground to swallow me up. No one had ever been so mean to me before. After that, it was really uncomfortable, and all of us were in a bad mood. Soon, it became obvious we'd all have to spend the night down there. So I found a corner as far away from Amy as possible and lay down. I was still shivering and thought about using the insect-infested blanket, but Amy had already grabbed it. There was no way I'd fall asleep. I was so thirsty, and even though the shelter luckily had a small toilet, there was no sink, which meant no running water. I'd have drunk the rain earlier if I knew this was going to happen. I covered my ears because I was afraid I'd hear them kissing, and eventually I must have fallen asleep because the next moment I found myself waking up to hearing a rustling sound. I looked over at Amy, and even though I couldn't see anything, I knew she was eating something. I could hear her. I couldn't believe she had food with her and wasn't sharing it. Did James know? I should have said something, but I was too scared. I'd already caused enough trouble. Finally, morning came, and by then my phone was at 2%. Soon, I wouldn't even know what time it was. I was bursting for the toilet, so I went to use it, and of course, Amy shouted at me and said my peeing was too loud and had woken her up. Then I noticed there was a light switch outside the toilet. I clicked on it, not expecting it to work, and suddenly the whole shelter was flooded with light. Amy quickly pulled the blanket up and told me to look away. Oh my gosh, were they not wearing clothes? Then Amy just laughed and said everyone knows that body heat is the best way to survive in cold weather. Ew! Once they got dressed, I realized how pretty Amy was, and it really annoyed me. How could I have thought James would ever be interested in someone like me when he had Amy? I ran up the stairs and tried to push the lid again, but then I just sat there waiting for people to arrive at school. Then I'd scream my head off. Plus, I didn't want them to look at me. I felt so insecure about my running clothes, and I hadn't even shaved my legs. I didn't want James noticing. I could hear the school bell and feet walking over us, but no one heard me scream. How long would we be down here? James was complaining about being hungry, and Amy too, but I knew Amy had eaten something in the night. She was a liar. We started looking around the place to see if we could find anything, and James suddenly sounded happy. Under the sandbags, he'd found some old bottles of water. The water looked disgusting, but I'd have drunk anything by that point. Both James and I downed like a liter each, but Amy refused. Suit yourself, I thought. Then about an hour later, I started getting a weird pain in my stomach. Oh no, there was no toilet paper. This couldn't be happening. I had to run and almost puked my guts up. And I wasn't the only one. James raced in after me, and at one point, we were both lying on the floor taking it in turns to vomit. Not exactly what I had in mind for our first date together. That water must have been 20 years old or something. Amy got seriously annoyed and even tried to drag James out of the bathroom. Was she jealous? And then I noticed an empty soda bottle behind the toilet. Had Amy secretly had a bottle of soda and not told us? How selfish. That first day seemed to fly by. Most of it spent in the bathroom, of course. By the end of the day, I'd almost lost my voice from screaming for help. Would we be stuck down there forever? And then nighttime came, and James and Amy got into a huge fight. Secretly, it made me happy to see them argue. James deserved better. He was super upset that he'd missed his football game, but Amy just kept saying he could go to college with her and then they'd never be apart. And James got really angry and said he didn't want to go to her college. Then the whole room went silent. It was tense. I didn't know what to do, so I just stayed quiet and pretended to be asleep. A while later, I heard someone saying my name. I opened my eyes and could see James. He said he could hear my teeth chattering and that I should come and share their blanket. But if Amy woke up and saw me, she'd go mental. I didn't care about her, though. James was actually being kind of nice to me for the first time in my life. I couldn't lose my chance. So I climbed under the blanket next to him. Our legs were almost touching. And of course, that woke Amy up. And when she saw me, I thought she was going to explode. James wanted to keep the peace, so he snuggled into her and left me lying there all alone. But I couldn't stop thinking about the moment we just shared. And during the night, I decided to try and get closer to him. I rolled over until I was almost right at his back. But then I heard something. They were kissing. I was watching them, wishing it was me he was kissing. I couldn't stop staring, but suddenly, Amy opened her eyes and caught me watching them. She told James, but James said I was asleep and that they should get some sleep too. But James didn't go back to sleep. He waited until Amy was snoring next to him, and then he reached out his hand and grabbed mine. I felt like my heart was going to explode, and I so badly wanted to get closer to him, but it was too risky. There was always the next night, right? So we fell asleep holding hands, and I couldn't stop smiling. In the morning, though, I was lying there all alone. When Amy got up to go to the bathroom, I smiled at James, and he smiled back. But then Amy came out and saw me and said, "Freak, stop staring at us like that." I thought James would stick up for me, but he didn't. He was acting like nothing had happened between us. The rest of that day was kind of weird. We just sat around quietly. At one point, James almost fainted. I mean, we were all starving. I was so weak, I just kept napping, and when I woke up from one of my naps, James and Amy were eating biscuits. Where did they get them from? I could almost feel the saliva pouring out of my mouth, and I assumed Amy would offer me one, but she didn't. They ate them all, and after that, I didn't speak to either of them. I was so mad. I couldn't sleep that night because my stomach was rumbling so loudly. But once Amy had fallen asleep, James reached into his pocket and handed me a biscuit. I swear I almost kissed him right there and then. This was why I had a crush on him. He was actually a good guy, even if he had a demon for a girlfriend. For the next few nights, we got into a bit of a routine. After Amy fell asleep, we'd lie there and hold hands. And one night, James came right up to me, and I could tell he was about to kiss me. But Amy started murmuring in her sleep, and he quickly moved over to her and held her. It drove me crazy. After we'd been down there for like 6 days, things were really starting to smell. The toilet, my clothes, it was nasty. And still, James and I hadn't shared a kiss. But for some reason, Amy still looked good. That day I noticed she didn't get up. It was like she'd given up on shouting for help, but it bothered me. Why should she get to sit there and chill? So I told her I'd just seen a huge spider, and I've never seen her run so fast. She raced up the stairs to where James was, and I immediately went over to where she'd been sitting. I just had this feeling she was hiding something, like another pack of biscuits. But I found something much bigger. Under where she'd been sitting was a loose part of the floorboard. I lifted it up and couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was so much stuff down there. Beauty products, food, a battery pack, even clothes. Oh my gosh, what was going on? I didn't have time to put the floorboard back before James appeared to find the spider. I whispered that Amy had been hiding stuff. James came running over and pulled out her phone. He knew her password and typed it in quickly. Then he saw some messages that said things like, "I need to find a way to stop him going off to college. I'm scared he'll leave me." As he was reading them and I was eating one of her secret chocolate bars, she came down the stairs. "What are you doing?" she screamed. But it was too late. We'd caught her red-handed. She tried to grab her phone back from James, but he wouldn't give it to her. Eventually, she broke down and said that she didn't want James to leave her for college. So she'd planned this. But she had only meant for them to be stuck down there for 1 or 2 days. Then she said I'd ruined it all by turning up and getting them locked in here. But there was something else. While she'd been talking, I'd been digging around, and inside a pair of her socks was a key. I held it in my hands and watched as James went crazy at Amy. He said he couldn't believe he dated such a psycho and that she'd officially ruined his life. Then the best part of all, he turned to me and apologized. He said he was sorry he'd treated me so badly, but actually he'd realized how amazing I was and had enjoyed our sneaky hand-holding sessions while Amy slept. At that, Amy went berserk. She ran towards me and I quickly jumped away. Then I watched as she dug around inside her secret hiding place. "Looking for this?" I asked, swinging the key in my hand. Then I turned to James and said, "She's been hiding this key the whole time." time. Before Amy could get to it, I ran up the stairs and undid the lock. James was right behind me, and we both climbed out and collapsed onto the ground laughing. We were free! As Amy climbed out, I thought she was going to kick me or something, but she just stormed off. And James shouted after her, "That's right, keep walking. I never want to see your face again." Finally, she was gone, and James turned to me and gave me the biggest kiss ever. We could see the janitor running towards us, and before all hell broke loose with our parents about where we'd been for the past week, James asked for my number, and now we're about to go on our first proper date. The worst week of my life just became the best week.